From Geppetto Studios in New Freedom, Pennsylvania, welcome to the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast, your home for inclusive, positive geek culture, where we talk about movies, comics, music, books, and whatever else we feel like. Please welcome your host.
I have been falling for 30 minutes!
Brad Mendenhall.
Hey kids, it is episode 296 of the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast. It is a mini episode where I talk about the recently concluded season 7 of Rick and Morty. Now this was an important season because it was the first one to not have any creative or talent input from Justin Roiland. Justin Roiland was the co-creator of the show, as well as the co-creator of Solar Opposites, and I think he had some input on the show Koala Man that just came out that didn't have a whole lot of impact. But Rick and Morty was the show that made Justin Roiland a star in the world of adult animation. He was the voice of the two main characters, Rick and Morty, and he was let go from the program because he accusations of inappropriate behavior, some of which I believe he was brought up on charges for, although those charges were dismissed. From my understanding, I believe there might still be some litigation. There's some civil litigation going on. And more, also, he apparently wasn't very involved creatively in the show any longer. Rick and Morty was co-created with Roiland and Dan Harmon. Dan Harmon, probably best known as being the creative force behind Community. Dan Harmon is known, or has a reputation for being a difficult person to work with behind the scenes. Very creative, very smart, but has butted heads with people, and has butted heads with networks. And so you had Roiland and Harmon, and I think by season 3 or 4, Roiland wasn't even showing up to the office. He wasn't showing up to the writer's room. His input was basically they would send him scripts for Rick and Morty and whatever other characters that he'd be voicing, and he would record his lines in a home studio and send them back. So he wasn't even, and he wasn't taking direction. There was no oversight. He would just say, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do. And he would read the lines and he would send them back. And when he was removed, it was a big question of what was going to happen with the characters that he voiced. Now, he also voiced one of the main characters from Solar Opposites. And what they did was they replaced him with actor Dan Stevens. Dan Stevens, probably best known as playing the Beast in the live-action Beauty and the Beast movie from 6 years ago. Dan Stevens has a British accent. The Corvo, I believe that was the name of the Corvo character that Justin Roiland was voicing on Solar Opposites did not, and they had some, in Solar Opposites, a pretty smart sci-fi parody. He got shot in the neck with a dart, and they healed him with a special voice healing ray, and then all of a sudden he had a new voice with a new accent. It's like, all right, we're gonna let this work. Kind of clever. I haven't watched Solar Opposites in a while. I watched the first 2 seasons. I thought it was good, but it didn't quite connect with me the way Rick and Morty has. Rick and Morty dealt with the loss of Justin Roiland by getting two different actors who did spot-on impersonations of Roiland's characterization of Rick and Morty, and they hired them. I have a good ear for this. I think I might have mentioned this in a previous episode. I have a good ear for different voice actors. And I can usually tell, it's like, oh, that's not the same person. I could not spot an obvious difference. Now, I wonder if I watched one Roiland episode and one post-Roiland episode, if maybe I would be able to call it out. And the thing with Rick and Morty, they go very long in between seasons. They've gone, I think, 18 months to 2 years in between seasons. And the seasons are 10 episodes long. So it's completely possible that side to side I would hear the difference, but because they have such a long break in between seasons, it's not as obvious. So then it becomes, does Rick and Morty lose anything by the quality of performance or the creative input? Now, as said, the rumor is there was not a lot of creative input anymore, or there was none from Justin Roiland other than what he brought to the vocal performance. And then a compelling argument could be made that if you have a voice actor who is not listening to the other work being done, is not taking feedback from directors, producers, scripts, the screenwriters, and that will be very limiting to the performance, regardless of the fact that he created these characters and theoretically would have an intimate knowledge about their inner workings. You're still losing something because there's no collaboration. There have been some think pieces done about how the actual performance have improved with the change in actors. Who knows? I don't necessarily see it. I thought that it was indistinguishable from previous work. I didn't notice any extra pathos or really anything different. And it's not meant as an insult. It just, it seemed like a regular season of Rick and Morty. In general, I thought it was a good season. The stories were just as thick. They always have very complex, thick plots. As smart, as sometimes gross, and as nihilistic as ever. One thing that it was called out, there was basically two big stories. First was, oh my gosh, it's Rick and Morty, but Roiland isn't Rick and Morty. And I thought that was handled very well. The second big story came out was how despised a middle episode... okay, 3 stories. The third story was about how despised the Numbericons, the rise of the Numbericons. And basically it was an episode of Rick and Morty that had no Rick and Morty. It was a spin-off of... maybe spin-off isn't the right term. It's a follow-up to a subplot in a episode that happened years previous where Ice-T was revealed to be part of an alien race of water or mineral or elemental base letters. I know. And they did a follow-up where the letter creatures, including now Water T, I know, fought number-based creatures. And there was a great battle. And it was pretty, I think it was sort of a throwback to 80s cartoons. I think there was a lot of Transformers the movie in there. Ice-T was on the episode voicing Water T's father, because in the previous episode where Ice-T had appeared, it was voiced by someone else. So they got him in to, voice his own dad. God, this sounds ridiculous. This episode was not well liked, and I thought it was fine. It reminded me a little bit of years and years and years ago, where the South Park in its either first or second season were going to reveal who was Cartman's father, and it was a big episode and everyone was all excited, and that was when South Park was at its absolute peak of popularity and pop culture awareness, and everyone was ready for the episode, and they said the episode began is like, Cartman's father will not be revealed, and instead we will be showing a special presentation of the Terrence and Phillips episode, Not Without My Anus. Terrence and Phillip were two minor characters in the world of South Park. They were Canadian, and they just had this crazy TV movie-esque episode about Terrence and Phillip, and it had nothing to do with any of the South Park characters. Fans lost their minds. I thought it was, I don't know, I tried to remember how I felt then. I would like to think in retrospect, it was clever. It was sort of fun. But it was the same thing where you throw with this Numbericons episode, throwing the audience completely off by, we're going to do a different show inside the show. It wasn't great, but I thought it was an interesting swing. The second story that got a little bit of press or a little bit of buzz was there was the final showdown with the Rick that appears in Rick and Morty and a recurring villainous character, Rick Prime. And Rick Prime was introduced 1 or 2 seasons ago, and he was the person who killed our Rick's, for lack of a better term, his wife, and set him on the path to becoming the evil genius mad scientist that he is. And Rick Prime showed up a few times here or there and was sort of presented as the ultimate Rick, and even more Rick than the Rick that we have been following, and seemed to be smarter and more clever and more devious and more of a sociopath than our Rick. And in, I want to say, the second or third episode of the season, our Rick and Morty, along with another recurring character, Evil Morty, teamed up and were able to successfully fight and kill Rick Prime. This would be like if Thanos had been defeated, not in Avengers Endgame, but if it had been defeated in the first Ant-Man film. That's the best. That's the best comparison I can make. It, partway through the season, we hadn't seen Rick Prime in a little while. Evil Morty had sort of been, it was sort of implied that he had been written out of the show, that Evil Morty achieved his goal and we wouldn't see him again. So it was crazy seeing Evil Morty. So it shocked a lot of fans, and not in a bad way. It was sort of a smart thing to do, where instead of waiting until the big season finale, no, we're gonna tie up this story. Pardon me. We're gonna close up this story just in, episode 3, episode 4, and it's gonna be a little bit self-contained, and there won't be any direct allusions to this. The following episode, Rick was sort of like laying around in a drunken stupor because he lost his motivation. But there weren't season-long obvious repercussions. Not terrible. I sort of liked it. It did do the thing that's been recurring arc on Rick and Morty, where you have the crazy fight sequences with a lot of wildly original sci-fi technology and theoretic, like Rick's about ready to be knocked out, so he pushes a button, so he goes into automatic fight mode, and then he fights, and then he wakes up partway through. It was clever. So you have all that clever, wacky sci-fi fight sequences, and then it ends with Rick Prime being tied up and taunting our Rick, and our Rick just punching him to death in a long and uncomfortable sequence. Sort of works. Overall, I think it was a good season of Rick and Morty, and I'm wondering if that's what we're going to get from now on. Rick and Morty is now a good show. Our expectations are very high, and also Rick and Morty has become a very successful launching pad for careers of creatives. I know one of the writers and producers of the show went on to do WandaVision, and then he's now that person whose name escapes me is going on and becoming very important in the world of Marvel. The show, the Star Trek animated show Lower Decks was created and produced by a former creative on Rick and Morty. Solar Man, Solar Opposites. Those are all featuring writers and producers, directors that got their start on Rick and Morty. So, similar to Brad Bird, Conan O'Brien, Dana Gould, all getting their starts, or at least a significant career boost, working on The Simpsons. But then The Simpsons loses those great creators and have to replace them, and it becomes a stepping stone as opposed to an end goal. I think Rick and Morty will always be good. It's always going to be daring, and it's always going to have its fan base. But we are probably 6-7 years removed from Rick and Morty being the highest rated show for men aged 16 to 32, whatever that age bracket is. And it's a very important age bracket for advertisers. It was a massively popular show in a very specific demographic. It just happened to be an important demographic. Nobody talks about Rick and Morty like that anymore. It is not it's now just a good, kind of popular show with a nice legacy. You can't stay on top of pop culture conscious for that long, especially when there's so many people involved in its creative. Dan Harmon, you lose one of its co-creators. The other co-creator, Dan Harmon, is doing other stuff. He did that Craptopolis, an animated show on Fox that I don't think anybody showed any interest in. I don't know if it's any good. I don't know if anyone's watching it. He's also working on a Community movie. He's doing other stuff. So it's impossible, and it's just impossible to burn that bright for forever. Simpsons was the best show ever, and The Simpsons is not what it was because it lost its the creatives behind it to put it together all moved on to other projects. In one case, one person was removed from the show, left the show, and then passed away. And South Park, which still has the same two people running that show and writing it and are still very involved, but you just can't be that ballsy and brassy forever and still have the same effect. South Park is still a very good show, but it just, nothing lasts forever. You can become iconic, you can be well respected, but you don't get to be the top dog and the daring, brassy, crazy show and the pulp culture touchstone forever. It just doesn't happen. But there's worse things than being a good science fiction animated show with smart, crazy plots. And I think they have a contract set for another 60 or 70 episodes. Rick and Morty's going to be around for a long time, and I think this season did prove that without Justin Roiland, the show can still be successful. They haven't dropped a significant step, losing his voice talent. So, that marks the end of this mini episode, and we're going to have another mini episode up soon because the first 3 episodes of Reacher are out, and I am an unabashed fan of that show. And until then, in the words of Jarf Arden,
see you in the funny pages.
Subscribe to the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever quality podcasts can be found. Rate and review us while there. Follow us on Twitter at CosmicGPod, and we will follow you back. Unless you're a jerk. We don't follow jerks. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cosmic Geppetto. We love hearing your ideas for upcoming episodes. Email us at cosmicgeppetto@comcast.net. Can't you just be the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man?